Hey, young preachers of the word of the gospel. Um, just a few things from Lucy Lind Hogan that I thought were interesting. I like what she has to say about introductions to sermons. Page 138, second paragraph. The introduction is the way you introduce yourself to your listeners. That sounds strange if you are preaching in the same church week after week, but each time you meet, you are different, your listeners are different, and you have a different combination of people. That's very important, right? You always potentially have new people there, but even aside from that, it is a way to warm up to your folks, to have some kind of introduction. And in my opinion, it can be very informal. I think the best introductions, if you are attentive to what's been going on prior to you getting up there, often the best introduction will be some kind of, I think, connection to what's already been said or sung or prayed within that service. It doesn't happen all the time, but very often, even though I might have some kind of introductory remarks prepared, I find that there's often something I want to connect to from earlier in the service. And that makes a nice starting point, doesn't it? You need to give your listeners a moment to settle into your speech patterns. You need to give them time to focus their attention away from the noise, the many things, both external and internal, that distract them and turn their attention to you. The rest of that paragraph's really good too. Just thinking for a moment about introductions. I'm going to say again, I think they're best kept pretty informal. You want to find ways to connect easily with your people. She talks a bit about manuscripts, sermon manuscripts, and preachers easily slip into a reading tone when they have before them a page filled with words in small font. I've found this to be way too true. In fact, while I have generally, in the last few years, and especially at Hakamba during this past year, but even before then, I've been working towards something my wife always encouraged me to do, which was to rely less, certainly not on a manuscript, but even rely less on too many notations. Obviously, you need to have some notes to guide you, but to be able to emphasize more eye contact, looking at the faces of the people, and allowing your speech to be, well, I'll say again, actually a little less formal. I mention this because just last Sunday, I wrote out, I didn't type it, I think that makes it even worse, but I did write out pretty much word for word on Saturday night the sermon that I preached the next day. And I did this partly because, without saying it to the people, this sermon was a little bit of an homage, I guess is the word, to one of my professors at NTS, a British New Testament scholar named Alex Deasley, who preached on the same passage that the lectionary gospel reading was on this past Sunday. And I've never forgotten his sermon. I mean, I don't remember the particulars, but I remember basically what he did with this text, and it had such an impact on me. I thought, well, I'm gonna try to kind of replicate that. And in doing so, I did write it out. I did find myself too glued even to these written words. I found twice where I misread the word or kind of lost my place. And because I wasn't doing a more extempore approach, it was obvious and mildly embarrassing. And I'm going to see if I can't find a way to download that sermon. It was a very short one. It was much shorter than Deasley's, I'm sure. Maybe it was 13 minutes, and then I said a little bit more after the prayer and prior to communion that kind of goes with the sermon too, but like 15 minutes, 16 max. I'll see if I can't, because I kind of want to I actually want to get your input, if I can get it up here, on how readily noticeable was it for you that I was tending to, rely pretty hard on more or less a manuscript. I do like what she says at the bottom, 152, and she kind of writes it out this way. And I think this is a good suggestion. It's the way that one of my favorite preachers, Reuben Welch, I don't know if he probably prepared them this way, but certainly when he published them, they came out in this kind of a kind of a poetic form almost. We can go a long way to prevent readeritis by preparing a pulpit script. I do like this, the bigger the font, and I have found this to be true. The fewer the words on a page, it will be for you to have your words before you and still look at the people to whom you are preaching. Great suggestion. And I would say that especially if you feel more confident with a manuscript, nothing wrong with that. It helps you keeps you on the rails as well, which sometimes I need. But if the print is large, I found this to be the true, the case, and maybe double space, maybe 14, 15 font. It's really big, and so there's a lot of space in there, and you're not trying to squint and find your place, right? And always, if you do something like this, and you, let's say you use the word processor and do it all and print it, I don't hardly need to tell you, you want to go over it really closely after you've printed. And what I would do is then make all kinds of underline, like little syllables that you make sure you put the accent the emphasis where you want it. You don't want to put the emphasis on the wrong syllable, so be careful about that. I like this. The top 153. Computers have made it immensely easy to take a complete manuscript and turn it into a script that you take into the pulpit. In fact, reading this again, actually, although I'm still probably going to go more handwritten and tend to be more notes, this is an awfully good way to write a sermon, to time it out nicely. That was one thing that was nice, because I wasn't going by just some sort of loosely organized notes. I had this thing written out, and I already knew it was about 13 minutes long. And sure enough, that's all it took. So that way you can also kind of time ahead of time and say, okay, like maybe where you need to cut something out. On that score, I would really strongly encourage you. I know that different church traditions kind of have different expectations on the length of a sermon. I don't know anybody in any evangelical or Church of the Nazarene or non-denominational or church where people would complain much if the sermon was shorter than usual. Okay, in those churches, too often preachers just dominate. They take too much time. I would really encourage you to think at the outside 22 minutes long. Like that's, and ideally 15, 16, 17 minutes. Especially if you make a habit of it, if you're preaching in the same place, the people will get used to that rhythm, and they'll know, for one thing, that you're not going to ask them to labor a long time, listening to you drone on and on. I'm trying to get this painting by my wife. There we go, just right. It was a tad askew. Now, I'm just reminded now of something that Mark Twain, i.e. Samuel Clemens, is reputed to have said. When it comes to a sermon, make sure your introduction is captivating, your conclusion is powerful, and that there's not too many words in between those two things. Something like that. I like it. I think that she has a lot of nice things to say about sermons for special occasions. I don't really know that there's anything here that I want to emphasize real strongly in your midst. I guess I did want to look at 154. I know that, yeah, 154, bottom of 154. There's 3 bullet points here. Let's look at them together. When you have finished your sermon, turn it into another outline. Okay, so maybe you start with an outline, fill it in, or however you do it. I don't know how important an outline is, to be honest. I get notes. Maybe it's because I'm not a terribly sequential 1, 2, 3 preacher. I do occasionally have, I never have more than 3 points. You don't want more than 3, okay? You don't want more than 3. I'm reminded of my first year at Point Loma, and we had this big faculty and spouses, very nice banquet dinner up in La Jolla. They used to do it up really nice when the school is just overflowing with money. We're still doing pretty well, but overflowing then. And this was the first event of the fall. So it was actually my first Point Loma event, probably, after we'd moved here, and Janice was with me. And President Brower, recently retired. At that time, he'd only been president a couple of years. He kind of gave like this speech about sort of like, it was either goals for Point Loma or ideals to stretch for, etc. He had 23. Oh my goodness, this man taught speech and communications. What was he thinking? It wasn't short, and even if you'd only given a minute to 23, let's say you kept your thing to a half hour, man, you've covered a lot of things. 3 points max. There, 3 points max. Not 4, 3 max. And 3's nice too. Whenever I have 3 points, I make sure that the people recognize that I do. So another outline, I don't know, but good notes, good structured notes. But I like the idea of having large font, lots of space, however many pages it takes. Don't print on the back side. I think she mentions that you don't want to be doing this. You just want to be able to, do that. Go to the next page, make sure they're in the right order. Highlighters are good. As she says, highlighters of different colors. Read through your sermon. You definitely want to do that. I don't use highlighters. I just use a pen of the same color. But you can, however you like to highlight, be sure you do that. Then the third point on 154, using a fresh copy of your sermon, highlight all theological language and scripture references. This is good. Read the sermon through the eyes of somebody who's seeking or is a newcomer to the faith. Are you assuming too much of the listener? Do you assume that the listeners heard of Noah and Moses, Thomas and Barnabas? Squint at your sermon and make sure it's hospitable, that it welcomes the person who's not well versed in the faith story or comfortable speaking the Christian language. I think this is really important, and generally I would just say, before I close this up, I'm just going to do this one. I preach to a small group every Sunday. We're actually growing a little bit right now. It's kind of an exciting time. But I never, ever assume that everybody there has heard, like, let's say it's a gospel story, that they've heard this. In fact, I try to say things like, you may not have heard this story before, or you may not have ever encountered these words of Jesus before, or something like that, so that nobody feels like, do I need to have some kind of inside track to get this? Small things, but small things can create a lot of hospitality for those who are really in need of it. I got my rock polisher running again. It's been a while. I suspect you hear it in the background. I hope it's not too annoying. I plan to see you Thursday. We'll finish up our discussion, finish Hogan's book, and we'll talk maybe a little bit more about a theology of preaching, since you all are working on your theology of preaching. And hope you're having a good day. Bye-bye.